It's hard to talk about Skyrim or any Bethesda game in general without immediately thinking of Fallout 76 or any other major Bethesda controversies in the past few years. And while Bethesda certainly have lived long enough to see itself become the villain we despise, there was a time not too long ago when Bethesda brought joy and excitement to the table when brought up instead of crushing disappointment. They made good games we looked forward to instead of finding new ways to mess up a game with so much potential for success that just wound up being a complete failure instead. That's not to say their past games didn't have issues, and we'll come back to that later on in the video. But it's no secret that while most of Bethesda's new titles are more popular than ever, the games are lacking that feel to it that we all came to love in the past. As an example, we have the voiced protagonist from Fallout 4. It was a bit of a controversy when it was first announced that Fallout 4 would be their first game to have a voiced protagonist. On one hand, with a voiced protagonist we can more easily relate to our character, and Bethesda has the possibility to tell a more interesting story and convey the emotions of our main character way better than they were able to in the past. While on the other hand, we'll get less unique dialogue and less options in general due to all of it having to be voiced. Now, Bethesda's strong suit has never really been to tell an amazing story. We have games like The Last of Us, Red Dead Redemption, Witcher 3 and Uncharted for that. What Bethesda has been good at doing is creating big open world games that feel alive and lets you immerse yourself into your character and live the life of a lone wanderer or the legendary Dragonborn. It's the endless of activities to do and countless playthroughs using different builds and rediscovering the world they've crafted for you. But with a voiced protagonist, they had the chance to tell a good story and put another mark on why we love Bethesda games. But it just didn't quite hit the mark like we hoped it would. While Fallout 4 definitely has one of the better stories of any Bethesda game, it's just not anything spectacular. When I think back on Fallout 4, the first thing that comes to my mind is not finding Sean or getting revenge on Kellogg. It's walking into a park and seeing a huge super mutant behemoth walk out of the lake and me having to fight for my life to defeat this enemy I just randomly stumbled upon. It's finding an old ship in the middle of the city of Boston manned with robots from before the war, protecting them from raiders and helping out their captain. It's all these random memorable events that happen that really makes the world we travel in feel alive. And Bethesda is actually really good at creating these moments. It's why we've come to love and look forward to their games. Now, I'm not saying I disagree with them taking a small risk and implementing a voiced protagonist. I'm actually surprised they didn't do it sooner than they did. I think decisions like these are needed to keep the games moving forward, even if it does hurt the role-playing aspect of the game. It's just that I don't think they utilized all the benefits that comes with a voiced character in the ways they could have. A good example of a game with no voiced characters at all is the new Pokemon games, Pokemon Sword and Pokemon Shield. After 20 years of Pokemon games, there's still not a single character that actually speaks, and it's really starting to show and just seems odd these days. The first time you boot up one of the games on your Switch and see a stadium full of people, a man walking onto the stage opens his mouth and nothing comes out. A text box appears and you're left to read whatever this man has to tell you. It's just not engaging, and the childhood dream for becoming a Pokemon trainer quickly shatters as your immersion is broken and you're left to read whatever anyone has to tell you for the rest of your game. Bethesda games are a bit different to this example in that we've had voiced NPCs since Oblivion, but you still get my point. Rather take some risks to evolve the franchise and make it stand out instead of doing the same thing over and over again until there's nothing new to expect anymore. The Elder Scrolls is one of my favorite franchises out there, and it dates back from when Bethesda were the heroes we needed and not the villains we had to fight against. And my favorite Elder Scrolls title is Skyrim. Now, okay, before you get your pitchforks out and burn me at the stake asking how on earth it's not Morrowind or Oblivion, let me explain myself. My first entry into the franchise was indeed Skyrim. I got it back when I was 13 years old at Christmas in 2011 for my PlayStation 3. I had never heard of the game nor the franchise ever before, but I instantly fell in love when starting up the game on Christmas Eve and playing through the intro. This game absolutely blew my mind as a kid. A huge open world with so many things I thought I'd never manage to see all of it. Being the Dragonborn was probably the coolest thing my 13-year-old brain had ever heard, and thus I delved into the region of Skyrim and began down a road that I would never leave again. Single-player RPGs is my now absolute favorite genre out there because of this game, and nostalgia obviously plays a huge part as to why this game is my favorite in the franchise. And yes, I have played both Morrowind and Oblivion, and while I absolutely love these games as well, the one that I keep coming back to is Skyrim. The replayability of that game is through the roof. Even without mods, it's a joyful experience, but with almost 100,000 mods on Nexus mods alone between the two versions, you'll never run out of things to explore and experience. Some examples of the quality mod you can try out, one of them is called The Forgotten City, a mod for Skyrim that won a writing award and is now being developed as its own game. Another one is called Enderroll. Now this is not as much a mod, it's actually an entirely new game built in the engine of Skyrim. And it's awesome, by the way. If you haven't checked it out already, you should. It's absolutely incredible. This game garnered very high reviews back in the day when it was first released, and it got so widespread that most gamers at the very least had heard of this game and this franchise. But why? What exactly made this game get all this attention it did? I mean, it's not a perfect game by any means, not even for 2011 standards. It has issues and is a complete buggy mess, but yet it's still played by more than 30,000 people on Steam right now as of me writing this 8 years after its release. One of the biggest things Bethesda managed to do right with Skyrim is its sense of exploration and its quests. We've had multiple major quest lines in Elder Scrolls games for a long time, and while some has been more memorable than others, Skyrim did a good job at tying them into the path of the player in an immersive and seamless way. You start out learning about the civil war going on in Skyrim right as you start up your game. And while it leans heavily towards the Stormcloaks, you're still given a choice as to which soldier to choose to side with in the beginning. On top of this, every town in the game has its own stand on where they side in the war. As soon as you arrive in Riverwood, if you ask the local shop owner for spells, he tells you about the Mage's College in Winterhold and suggests you visit there if you want to learn more about spells. On your way to Winterrun, you meet Ayla the Huntress and her band of brothers and sisters, a band of companions fighting together as mercenaries, and you should visit them if you're looking to fill your pouch with coin. They quickly manage to give the player the information they need to make a decision as to what their character can become. And while these questlines doesn't have as memorable plot lines as many other RPGs does, it makes up for it by introducing them to you in a way that lets you pick and choose what exactly you as the player want to do and whenever you want to do them. It's the freedom that other RPGs doesn't quite manage to give you that gives Skyrim this big appeal. While it can be immersion breaking that the world eater Alduin is waiting for you patiently until you run around the world collecting cabbages, cheese wheels, and build a butterfly collection in your newly built home you got from becoming the Thane of Dawnstar, it also gives you time to explore their vast world and make your own stories on your own adventures. A game like Kingdom Come Deliverance thrives from being a realistic medieval RPG that has a world that's alive. The world moves along with or without you, so if you're told to meet a certain person at sunrise and you're not there, they'll either leave without you or you'll face the consequences for not showing up on time. And it works for that game because of what it tries to be. But where Kingdom Come Deliverance tries to tell you a specific story about Henry, Skyrim doesn't have a story in the same way. And this is where the exploration comes back in play. While Skyrim does have the main quest and storylines you can follow, it's not necessarily the main objective of the game. The main objective is whatever you want it to be. This means that the player's curiosity is what drives them forward, and not so much a compelling story or super interesting characters. This can be a difficult task to succeed in, as this means you need to keep the player curious and wanting to do things in your game on their own. You can guide them with map markers and tales of adventure and treasure through dialogue, or big landmarks in the distance that piques your curiosity. And that's exactly what Skyrim does, and it does it phenomenally. In the base game alone, Skyrim has 343 locations for you to explore and discover. With DLCs, this gets bumped up to a total of 459. There are so many things for you to explore, always a carrot at the end of the stick to keep you going. This combined with the 273 quests in the game, it makes sure that you'll never run out of things to keep you occupied. I mean, we all know that feeling when you think you've seen and done every quest and location in Skyrim at least once by now, but yet somehow you manage to find something new on every single playthrough. This is one of the reasons why it has such a high replayability factor to it. And speaking of replayability, this is obviously one, if not the biggest reason why Skyrim ever got as popular as it did. The amount of times you can start up the game and make a new character, get super excited to try out a new build just to end up making another stealth archer is astounding. Really though, the amount of different ways you can play the game and different sorts of characters you can roleplay as really shines the light on how much replayability this game truly has. A big decision that was made when making this game was to have enemies that scale to your level. This is actually a pretty controversial topic within RPGs. Should we have one big open world where you can go wherever you want, whenever you want, because most enemies are scaled to whatever level you're currently at? Or should we have zones with different level groups so that you can guide the player down a path and control where they can play and when they can access new areas? I don't personally have a preference for one or the other, it all comes down to what the game tries to do. In Witcher 3, enemies are not scaled to your level like they are in Skyrim. Here you could, as a level 10 character, encounter a griffin with a much higher level than you that will absolutely destroy you. This can provide challenges to the player that they don't originally expect, making them interested in going out and completing more content so they can eventually come back and wipe the floor with the previously encountered griffin. It makes you feel like your character becomes stronger as you play and progress your game, and can feel really rewarding and satisfying when done right. The downsides of this system is that it often means that when you're done with the main quest line, you're so high level that past content that you might have skipped at the time has become so weak it is no longer worth doing. Or you could get stuck having to go do side content that you have no interest in doing because you're suddenly just too underleveled to do the main quest line. Witcher 3 does a great job at preventing these things from happening, but that's for another time. We're here to talk about Skyrim. The way Skyrim makes its level scaling work and not feel punishing for never really outleveling your enemies is by giving you perks and abilities like shouts that power up your character in other ways. It could be the ability to craft better armor through smithing, or just a flat out damage boost to your one-handed swords. It makes sure that you never get so powerful that you'll breeze through dungeons, but also that it never gets so hard that you feel like you have to leave and come back later. This gives Skyrim the ability to be played endlessly, even after you're done with your main questline. And when paired with the vast amount of quests and locations, it's one of the biggest reasons why Skyrim always feels like it has something new for you to do, as you're never quite done. And that's not to mention that they added endless leveling in their 1.9 patch in 2013, further increasing the replayability, so that you could now exceed the previous level cap of 81 and reset a skill once you've leveled it to 100, and thus level forever and get more and more powerful. So, replayability and the vast open world with tons of things to discover. What else does Skyrim has going for it? What about characters and gameplay? The gameplay of Skyrim is some of the simplest I've seen in an RPG. Sure, you have a lot of options on what sort of weapons types to use, but it all comes down to spamming right click, or both mouse buttons at once in case you're dual wielding. There's no dodging mechanics or real strategic options to take. You can use potions and scrolls to empower you in battle, but when the game pauses so you can eat 41 cheese wheels and be back at full health, it doesn't really add anything to the combat mechanics. So while the combat is rather simple and not very demanding, the gameplay loop that makes it exciting comes back to the exploration and our curiosity. We want to go to the next dungeon to see what sort of creatures might be inhabiting this tomb or this cave, and see what sort of loot we'll get while making our way through. I also think that the somewhat boring combat of Skyrim is the reason why people tend to always return to the stealth archer character, because that's the one we feel like we can control a little bit, and we actually have to aim our mouse around in addition to tapping our one button for firing. Plus, we have the small strategic option of whether or not we're gonna be sneaking around to get those crits or not. It's still not much, but it adds more depth to the combat than any of the other options does to the game. But for Elder Scrolls 6, I think they need to come up with more involved combat, especially in the time where shooters, MOBAs and games like Dark Souls are as popular as they are. We like having combat that makes us feel good when we pull off a sick combo, or rewards us when our aim is good, or when we just straight up outsmart an opponent. It doesn't have to be Dark Souls levels of hard. That appeals to a specific audience, and I don't think combat like that would fit an Elder Scrolls game in the first place. But we need something a little more engaging than spamming one button and a shout to press every 30 seconds to make the combat a bit more exciting than it currently is. Characters and writing is another Achilles heel for Bethesda. This is not their strong suit. They don't have memorable characters like, let's say, Ciri and Geralt from Witcher 3 or Ellie and Joel from The Last of Us. But they also don't need those to make an RPG like Skyrim compelling. It's important to have characters that stand out, and they do have a few of those, like Ulfric Stormcloak, Parthenax, Cicero, Sheogorath, or Serana. But they're not very deep and fleshed out characters. We usually get a pretty big questline tied with these characters, but they still aren't fleshed out enough and are just not interesting. Writing isn't as easy to get right in RPGs with the vast amount of NPCs you'll be meeting. It's hard to put time into making each and every one of them interesting and memorable, but it's possible. We've seen games like Witcher 3 and Red Dead Redemption do it. You could say that Witcher 3 has a bunch of books and now a Netflix show that helps the writers get a feel for their characters, and therefore have an easier time to making them interesting and memorable. And while I agree that that's very much the case with the main characters like Ciri, Geralt, Triss and Yennefer, etc., some of the NPCs in the side quest of those games has so much character that I remember them just as much as the main characters. And they're entirely made up from CD Projekt Red and are never mentioned in the books. The best and biggest example of this is the Red Baron from Witcher 3. He's such a memorable character, and yet he has no presence in the books and he just oozes personality. And the tough choices that has to be made in the questline is just jaw-dropping. It's impactful stories like these that I crave and want in a new Elder Scrolls game. While I don't necessarily trust Bethesda to be able to pull this off, I can still have hopes and dreams of seeing high quality writing and character building like that in an Elder Scrolls game. Let's take a look at the visuals and the sound of Skyrim. Visually, the game was never something amazing or mind-blowing. When you compare it to something like Uncharted 3 that came out 10 days prior to Skyrim, Uncharted knocks it out of the park. But for an open world game of this scope, I'd say Skyrim pulled it off pretty well. And I actually think Skyrim's graphics have aged pretty well too. Even with no mods using the special edition, the game can still look pretty beautiful over 8 years later. The issues Skyrim had with its graphics was mostly just low-res textures, while the scenery was actually pretty great. The caves felt like places that bandits had set up camp, and the snow-covered tundra felt like something you'd encounter walking around in a high fantasy northern landscape. Then of course, with mods you can make the game look breathtaking. And we'll get back to that whole modding scenario that Skyrim has going on for it in just a little bit. First, let's talk about the music. Yes, that music. Jeremy Soule has been composing music for the Elder Scrolls games since Morrowind, and we're absolutely in love with the soundtracks he's been giving the games, and it's undoubtedly one of the reasons why those games are so dear to our hearts. Who haven't heard the intro of Morrowind or Oblivion after a long time away from the games and had chills run down your spine? Just listening to the music makes you want to jump right back into the world and lose another 100 hours to one of these games. Now, last but certainly not least, we have the mods. There's no doubt that without mods, Skyrim wouldn't be nearly as popular around the world. While the base game might be lacking in certain areas and feel unfinished, or the graphics might seem out of date for your taste, then there's a mod out there to fix it. Are you tired of the lacking depth in combat? Want harder, more advanced AI for your enemies? There's a mod for that. It's absolutely jaw-dropping when you start to realize how unlimited potential the game has, when you realize there's a modding scene out there 8 years later still going strong and creating improvements to an already excellent game. It's safe to say that no matter what sort of experience you're looking for in an RPG, if it's not there already in Skyrim, someone out there has certainly managed to make a mod for it. Even though Skyrim is an amazing game, and to this day is still one of the most popular RPGs out on the market and is available on pretty much any electronic device in some form or another, it still has a lot of places to improve. We've touched on some already, but one of the major things that need to change for Elder Scrolls 6 is how empty the beautiful world they've created can end up feeling. Cities are very underwhelming. Most cities have a handful of people that aren't just static same response NPCs, and wandering the streets of solitude ironically makes you feel as alone as the name implies at times. Another good example is the Civil War. When playing the siege missions of this questline, you're really feeling the last stretch of the creation engine. You and a handful of soldiers storming one of the biggest cities of Skyrim, guarded by another handful of soldiers. It manages to completely shatter your immersion as you're at the peak of this civil war that's been unfolding, and yet it barely manages to feel like a small battle. In general, seeing the same old bugs repeat themselves game after game is getting quite old at this point. They need to create a more polished end product that they have in the past. They can't keep letting the modding community fix their own mess, and I hope Fallout 76 has finally made that clear for Bethesda too. That while we usually enjoy your games, having it running like ass, even on high-end systems, be completely full of game-breaking bugs, poor connection to servers, poor game optimization just doesn't cut it anymore. We need to see improvements to the franchises we love, whether it be through better handling and care from management and developers, through a new and improved engine, which I find highly unlikely with the amount of time and money they'd have to put into something that has no guarantee of being any better than their current mess of a technology, or through outsourcing projects and getting help from other studios, or increasing team sizes is up to Bethesda to figure out. But improvements need to happen if you want to stay on top of your throne, because gone are the days when you didn't have any competition in the open world single player RPG genre. A lot of companies out there are ready to fight for that throne, and with every mistake Bethesda has been doing over the past few years, who's to say they haven't already lost that throne for good? Hey guys, thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. I've been sick ever since New Year, so that's why there's been a bit of a pause in me uploading videos. Also, this is the first kind of video like this I've ever done, so please let me know what you think down below. And last but not least, we have a Discord channel with a lot of friendly and nice people from the community, so please join there if you'd like. Thank you so much again, and I will see you on the next one.